The road that GPS refuses to map, locals avoid it. They call it Limestone Cut on county maps, but no map app will take you there. Not in daylight, not at 3 in the morning, not even if you stand at the mouth of the lane with full bars and beg your phone like a superstitious traveler. The line of asphalt slips off Route 27 near the Ohio River, just past a caved-in orchard and a billboard for a roadside Jesus that no longer stands. In person, the turn is ordinary. On a screen, it is missing, as if the road and the world had decided to keep a small secret between them. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This is in southeastern Ohio, down in Gallia County, where the hills go soft and the river carries towboats like patient thoughts. The year was 2022, late September. Goldenrod along the guardrails. Soybean fields gone the color of toast. I drove there on a Friday after work because a listener named Thayer Lorne had written to me with a subject line that felt like a dare. The road your GPS refuses to map. Locals avoid it. Please come before the county pours gravel again. Thayer was not a crank. She taught second grade in a brick school with a playground that leaned into a sycamore's shade. She coached a Lego league. She used the word prudent in a way that made you want to be. Her email listed dates and names the way people list ingredients. 2 wrecks in 2 years, 1 missing signage, 1 strange call to the sheriff's office just after midnight in late June. She did not say haunted, she said wrong. I left Columbus at 4:30 with a thermos of coffee and a box of gas station crackers and the kind of optimism you only get on a 2-lane in fall. South on 23, east on 35. The sun slung low behind me, the way good music hides its effort. By 7:15, I rolled past Vinton's courthouse with its white clock face turning the hour into a suggestion. I kept the radio quiet. In the passenger seat, the county plat book rode buckled like a fussy child. I could feel the river before I could see it, the way the air saturated and the smell of damp earth put its hand on your shoulder. I reached the turn at dusk. Limestone Cut was marked by a county sign that had once been green and was now a speculation. A locked gate blocked a gravel spur to the right, but the paved lane went on unbothered, as if all gates were for other people. My phone sat in the cup holder, showing me nothing. The blue line ended in a gray shrug. I tried 3 apps. Same shrug. The plat book said the road existed, had always existed, and ran 2 miles east to a decommissioned ferry landing that had not seen a ferry since 1978. The app said, find another way. Thayer's warning lived in my pocket. Locals avoid it after dark. They say it runs warm. They say it has more turns than it used to. They say tires squeal on dry asphalt without your foot agreeing. The first 100 yards were ordinary. Willow and ash. An old fence stapled to posts that leaned like tired men at a bus stop. The air smelled faintly of limestone and wet leaves. Then the temperature did a small, undeniable thing. It rose. Not a gust, not a patch of sun through trees, a steady, even climb that lapped over my forearms and stayed. I glanced at the dash. Outside temp read 64, rising to 68, then 71. The date on the dash glowed September 23rd. The time said 7:47 and slipped to 7:50 without being asked. I lowered the window to let the river air in. The warm beat met the cool and negotiated a truce that left sweat at my hairline. A bend. Another. The road narrowed until it felt like a confession. The trees grew close enough to see where vines had taught them to bow. I rolled slower. A small bridge came into view, wood deck, steel truss. A sign nailed to a poplar announced 1 lane in letters that had been painted by someone who believed in understatements. Beyond the bridge, the road ripple-curved through a cut so tight the rock faces wore each other's dust. I stopped before the bridge, because I am not brave so much as careful. I set the hazard lights flashing red into green. I listened. A train whispered somewhere upriver. Crickets laid a steady carpet of sound over everything. From the cut, a thin metallic note like cooling machinery. The warm air possessed a sweetness I could not name immediately. Jams and canning season came to mind. Then the word arrived. Apples. Not Honeycrisp and not cider. Fallen apples. Ferment thinking about becoming something else. I took my notebook and recorded the details the way you do when you want the future to trust your memory. Time, temperature, smell, no wind, no other cars. Then I drove across the planks and felt the boards answer the tires like a breath under my feet. The cut rose. The hill pressed close. A corner went tighter than it looked on the approach. My rear tires slid a fraction, not enough to call it a slide, enough to make my throat say a quiet word I would not put in print. The steering wheel thudded softly, as if there were two wheels telling me two slightly different stories about straight. I eased. I took the next bend slower. There is a point in a road where the land decides whether you are a guest or a problem. Limestone Cut decided I was a slow guest and tolerated me. The warm air leveled at 76, then climbed another couple of ticks. The smell of apples deepened into something like a recipe, cinnamon without spice, yeast without bread. I passed a turnout with two straight ruts that led into grass and ended at a log older than my car. A shape hung from a branch ahead. I braked. It was a memorial. Crossed from cedar rails wired together, silk flowers that had learned to be brave in rain, photos in a sleeve of plastic tacked below a name printed on glossy paper. Mireille Pasque, 19, a date in October 2020. Below it, a line her father must have chosen, the road that brought you home. I got out. The heat met me like a body. My phone tried to show me bars, then tried not to. A moth hit the hazard light and changed its mind. I stood with my hands in my pockets and felt the place balance itself on me. When I turned across the road, I noticed another set of flowers half hidden in blackberry cane. The name blew up at me when wind finally remembered how. Osric Vales, 21, May 2021. Same line. The road that brought you home. I walked farther along the cut until it opened like a sigh. The lane flattened to a seam along a scrim of meadow that used to be something else. You can tell by how grass lies. If it grows with a memory of rose, something stood there before. The sky went the color of a bruise, deciding between night and purple. A light flickered ahead, low and steady. I squinted. Not a house, not a car, a lantern, rope handle, old-fashioned glass with its bubbles catching the last light. It swung at the mouth of a driveway, if driveway is what you call two parallel lines of dirt that remember wagons. A woman stood a few feet back from it in a denim coat and boots that had done more than look good. She raised a hand. Not a stop, exactly. A hello shaped by caution. You are going the wrong way, she said. Her voice had small-town plainness and age that could have been anywhere between 35 and 55 because work makes a music of people that is hard to date. She nodded to my car. Turn around at the lane. There is no place to swing up ahead. It goes to water and then to nothing, and the bank will be slick after last night. I introduced myself. I said my name and the name of my show. Her face did not change. She untied the rope from a dogwood sapling and brought the lantern closer. The glow put a field of gold on her cheek. You are the radio girl, she said, not unkind. Thayer told me you were coming. She said you are polite. She looked at my tires. I would go back before you go forward. The ferry road has two corners that do not know they are corners, and if you slide there, you will spend the night with your axle thinking about consequences. I asked her name. She said Tamsin Holt. She kept a hand wrapped around the lantern handle, as if light were something you hold to keep it from leaving. She pointed to the bank of the cut where the rock shouldered out above us. Hear that, she said. The rock under here runs with water. Not springs exactly. Leaks from the old drain gallery. The county drilled holes so the slope would get lighter and the holes steam and fall. The air warms, the road sweats. It is not witchcraft. It is a bad idea. We keep pretending we'll dry out. Her lantern threw small moons into the glass of my windows. A flock of nighthawks cut a pattern above the trees. The warmth wrapped the throat more than the skin, which is how you know it belongs to breath or rot. Tamsin tilted her head toward the river. You cannot see it from here, but it sits too close. When the ferry ran, the road came straight to the ramp. They moved the river to suit the men, and the river said, fine, I will move the bank to suit myself. And it has been a conversation since. Why will no app draw it? I asked. She shrugged slowly, as if some questions wore heavy coats. I heard it was a break in the public line after the flood in 2004 when the county closed it to repair the approach and never told the machines they had opened it again. I heard the maps blacklisted the coordinates when a mother drove into the river by following a robot voice that said, "Continue." I heard a man who knows about things sent an email to a company that said, "Please leave it off. We are tired of retrieving tourists and their courage. The people who make those clouds of roads do not live here. They live inside a different weather." Her hand flicked lightly at the memorial. Myre was my niece. Osric was her friend. They swung through here in a rain they thought would stay light. One slid, then the other came to help and turned around on land that looked like land and was not. The bank changes in a storm. The river is a liar that tells the truth when it feels like it. We stood with our feet on a road that wanted to be water. Time thinned. The lantern made a small island. Crickets sang as if the night were not worried about us at all. Thayer told me, "Locals avoid it," I said. Tamsin laughed once, a dry wire of a laugh that had carried heavier things. Locals avoid it when they are smart. Some are not smart all the time. Sometimes I am not. Sometimes I stand at the ferry mark and listen to the buckles tick when the night cools them and tell my mother out loud that it is time to put the kettle on. She died 2 winters ago, and still I tell her she put 50 years into this hill. The hill speaks her name when the wind is slow. You will make a story and it will be tidy, and the road will keep doing what it has done since horses learned to trust it. It will take what you said on it if you hurry. I asked if I might walk to the landing with her. She considered my shoes and the angle of the hill and the slick of wet in the lantern's light. She nodded once. We left the car with hazard lights, confessing my bad choice to whoever came next. We walked with the lantern and our breath and the warm in our faces until the dark gave us what it was holding. A low lip of concrete with bolts that had once held a chain, a post with rings that had carried ropes heavy with river. The river itself turned its blank face up and said nothing. Across the water, 3 lights ran tin-tin along a ridge. Behind us, the hill kept its gravity like a rule book. Tamsin set the lantern on the ramp and crouched. "See here." She pointed with a patience that came from knowing a place by its mischief. The asphalt meets the pour with no shelf. In summer, fine. In rain, gone. The silt builds a veneer. Your tire thinks it is road, your foot thinks it is time to turn, then you are signing a form you do not remember. She stood, the lantern painting the underside of her chin. You will want to say the road is cursed. It is not. It is low. There is a difference. Low places keep things. Heat, fog, news. People's stories when they cannot carry them anymore. This one keeps a kind of warmth that does not belong to weather. It comes from the hill and the old galleries drilled in 1952 when the county had money from a federal thing and men believed rock would behave. Rock behaves like a teenager with a kind heart. It tries until it does not. We walked back, not slow and not fast. The road felt different even in the short space between the landing and the cut. In the notebook of my body, I wrote a line I could not read until later. The turns here remember another set of hands on the wheel. I had the sense, foolish but insistent, that there are more curves than there used to be, and that the road will add one for anyone who comes distracted. At the car, Tamsin lifted the lantern again and said the thing I had not wanted to hear because it was the only thing that mattered. Do not publish the directions. If a person knows, they know, and they approach with respect. If they do not, their phone will talk them out of it and we will save work. Write about the heat. Write about the girls who keep silk flowers alive in rain. Write about how the river and the county have a conversation. In October, no one else gets to hear. But do not draw a map for the kind of curiosity that leaves us with Sunday morning calls. I promised her. I meant it. She nodded, then lifted the lantern to her face and blew gently so the flame leaned and stood again. Then she said the softer thing that made me like her. If you need to end your story, end it with a sentence that knows how to sit down. The road is still here without your sentence. I will walk it tomorrow with my sister and tell her about the way our mother scolded mud. That will be the end that matters. We said goodnight the way people say it when they know they will see each other in a grocery aisle soon enough. I turned the car in a careful crescent and returned over the bridge that knocked the tires politely 3 times. At the first straight stretch, I stopped and turned off the engine and the lights and sat in the dark, letting the warm air forget me. The smell of apples and limestone and old rain moved through the open window like a slow parade. Far off, a coyote made a cracked sound and then decided not to continue. I wrote in the notebook by the dash light. 8:54, 75 degrees, crickets, no wind, one moth, determined. On the way back to Route 27, a truck came around the curve with someone from here at the wheel. He lifted two fingers from the top of the wheel in that rural benediction, eyes steady. I answered in kind. We passed without incident. My phone found a signal and rushed to tell me things I did not need. I turned it face down. The river kept its counsel. I stayed at a motel with a door that opened to the parking lot and a shower that sprayed like a hose with a grudge. At 11, I lay on the bed and listened to the highway need the night. I dreamed a dream that did not need translation. I drove the road in June in a rain that put a lid on the world. I felt the turn that did not know it was a turn. I saw silk flowers underwater moving like they were alive. When I woke at 3, the room was hotter than it should have been. I set the thermostat down, it huffed, I opened the door, and the night came in like medicine. In the morning, I met Thayer at a diner with a pie display that could make you forget your name. She wore a sweater with elbows that had done more thinking than most elbows. She brought a paper yard sale sign with a hand-lettered arrow pointing left. She set it on the table next to the sugar caddy as if it were a relative. When the waitress poured coffee, Thayer said, "We used to put these at the turn because apps would not, and people would stop right there in the lane with the river in their trunk. The county asked us not to. Said it increased liability. Now we wave and we hope." "You saw Tamsin." "I did," I said. "She told me not to draw a map." "Good," Thayer said. Her mouth set around the word like a decision. I asked about the calls to the sheriff's office. She had copies. Public record after someone redacts the parts that hurt, one at 12:04 a.m. in late June. A voice breathing hard. "Can you send someone to the ferry road? I do not know if I am on a road." The operator asked for cross streets that did not exist. A second call at 12:12. Same number, a different voice. "We got her. We need a tow, not an ambulance. No injuries. No one drinks on a Thursday in this county, not like that." Thayer told me stories that were not mine to take without permission. The woman at the landing had taught Sunday school for a decade and could thread a needle in a moving truck. The boy in the BlackBerry cane had planned to enlist and then to come home. The ferry used to carry school buses and funeral processions, and once, in 1964, a parade float for the county queen when the bridge upriver closed for repairs. The operator had a name like a hymn, Dolan Pike. He took quarters with a smile and never wrote them down, and the county forgave him because he put back the difference out of his pocket at Christmas. At noon, I drove back once more because leaving is easier if you say the goodbye that feels like a choice. The day stood warm, even without the night's peculiar swell. The cut reflected a brightness that made the dashboard look cleaner than it was. I idled by the memorials, rolled down the window, and said the names out loud once each. Myray, Osric. The air did not change. The river kept the same tone of voice. A kingfisher strafed the bank and laughed meanly at an idea it did not respect. At the leveling in the trees, a county crew had set cones. 3 workers stood with a clipboard, a shovel, a rope to measure where the bank thought it should be. One of them wore his safety vest open, and the white undershirt said he had been at it since 7. He pointed at the asphalt and drew an invisible curve in the air, as if to show the piece of road how to round itself properly. Another squatted and peeled brittle weeds from a crack like string cheese. The third looked up when I slowed. He lifted a hand, the rural benediction again. I could not tell if he was welcoming me or telling me to go around. I went around. I kept the tires on the places that saw tires last time. You want a reason a road does not show up on a phone? Choose one. Bureaucracy, liability. A digital map made by a company that is afraid of being named in a lawsuit cannot afford local color. A dataset that drops a line because a county closes a gate for a week, a volunteer editor who got spooked, or the oldest reason, Because the people who live there asked, and the people who make maps sometimes listen. Here is the part you can keep if you are the kind of person who needs a rule. If locals avoid a road, do not decide you are immune to their reasons because you are careful. Be careful at the places where land forgets itself. Warm air on a cool night means a stone or a story is breathing, and you should give it room. If a turn looks straighter than it is, it belongs to water or to someone else's memory. If you smell apples on limestone in September where no orchard stands, that is the hill reminding you this was a farm before your car was an idea. I drove away before dark because I had promised. The two-lane lifted me back toward the highway like a kind hand on a back. The plat book lay open to a page that showed a thin, gray line stopping shy of the river. I did not pencil it in. Some lines stay honest by remaining incomplete. Months later, when the episode aired, people wrote to tell me about roads in their own counties that maps pretend not to know. A road in Vermont that snowplows leave until last and hikers take in June only. A road in East Texas that turned to soap in rain and led to a bridge a paper mill had once owned. A road in western Pennsylvania that slid a few inches each season until the houses leaned into one another like a wedding party after the toast. None of them wanted directions. Most wanted me to say out loud the thing they already believed. A map is a promise made by someone who cannot know your exact night. I went back in winter. The river carried skim ice, and the air had lost interest in warmth. Limestone Cut breathed only rock, careful and slow. The memorials wore new ribbons that made color out of gray. Tamsin's lantern hung from a nail in her shed, unlit but ready. I parked on the turnout and watched for a long minute. No cars, no lights. Only the slow heave of a place that will outlast the names you put on it. If you ever find yourself at a turn your phone refuses to bless, do this. Put the device in the glove box, roll down your window, call the place by the names you were given by people who have rinsed dishes there. Listen for a warmth that belongs to stone or rot or story. Ask if you are a guest or a problem. If the answer takes too long, turn around, go home. Let someone else keep the road for you until you've earned it. Limestone Cut still runs from 27 to the water. Mireille and Osric still own two small pieces of shoulder where silk flowers learn new weather. The ferry still waits in the old bolts when fog pulls the river toward the bank. The apps still refuse, which feels like respect finally performing something like wisdom. The locals still avoid it after dark, and you can call that superstition if you want. I call it the way people learn to live, with a story that does not need their approval to keep going. Wherever you are, whichever hour you gave to this, hear this as you put the kettle on or slip your keys into a dish. A road can be true and not be for you tonight. Let that be a comfort and not an insult. The land does not need your footsteps or your tires to remember its lines. It is enough to name the warmth, bow to it the way you might bow to a neighbor, and step back into the lit part of the map where your house pours light through a window like a square of mercy. He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He did not see the staircase until the wind laid the lake down flat, a high mountain stillness that came like a held breath. It was late afternoon on Fontana Lake in western North Carolina, where drowned hills wear water like a borrowed coat, and the concrete dam throws a cold shadow that teaches you to look twice. The drought had been long, stingy, the kind that draws shoreline back like a tide that lost faith. Ansel Rook, 39, a surveyor who liked boats better than offices, let his rented skiff idle and watched the pale slope of silt with its driftwood teeth. Then the light tipped, and a line of gray stone showed under the green, not random at all, steps as even as counted breaths, leading up from water toward nothing that should exist. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? That October, 2022, the Smokies stood sharp against a sky the color of rinsed linen. The air smelled of leaf duff and gasoline and the faraway tang of rain that was always a rumor this year and rarely a fact. Ansel had driven out from Bryson City after lunch with a paper cup of coffee and a coil of measuring tape because the county had asked for photos of exposed foundations along the North Shore. The maps they kept were honest but out of date, and the lake was telling different stories every week. He wore a windbreaker the color of old blueberries, a hat with a frayed bill, and the face of a man who does not mind being alone if the work has edges. He cut the motor and drifted. The steps began in green water a little deeper than a tall man's reach, the lake clear enough in that pocket to show the top 3 treads before light blurred into bottle glass. They continued above the surface, slick with algae at the line where water had been yesterday, then dry, then dusty, another dozen risers marching toward a slash of bank where saplings clawed at loose dirt. There was no porch, no house, no landing where a hand might reach for a knob, just a staircase that went up and then kept going as if the air were a hallway no one had told it how to be. Ansel nosed the bow toward the steps and let the skiff kiss the lowest dry riser. The hull made a hollow sound he heard in his knees. He stood, tested his balance, and stepped onto the first stone. It held. He took another. The risers were a hair shorter than modern code, built for legs from a different century. He climbed 10, then 11, then 12, a little more than a story, in a house that had learned to take weather as a sermon. He stopped where the steps met an absence and laid his hand on the sidewall that ran up either side like bones. Mortared fieldstone, careful work, the kind that starts with winter in mind. He looked back. The lake held his boat like a hand holds a toy. The dam stood off to the west, all angles and utility, its face unreadable. A loon called once far out, the syllable slanted and old. The stare made no answer, and that felt like an answer. He took out his phone. No signal, which is how stories get their chances. He knelt and ran his fingers over scrape marks in the treads where feet had once taught stone to be polite. He brushed silt from a riser with the cuff of his jacket and uncovered a line of letters someone had cut with a chisel and a spare hour. Willow Gap. The name felt right in the mouth. The steps had belonged to a place on a hillside that no longer agreed to exist. A truck rumbled on the scenic road above the tree line, then faded. Ansel stood. He is not a dramatic man, not a man who says the word haunted when the word history will do, but he felt a little movement in his scalp when his boot tried the next tread up and met nothing it could trust. He lifted his foot and set it again, and the soul found purchase on air as if stone continued in a material too stubborn for his eyes. He could feel something there, a resistance like the way a field of grass resists when you try to step through a place where deer have passed and the stems remember. He pressed. His weight held. He let it go and stepped back, heart knocking once, but not twice. He stood on the stair where real ended and whatever else began. The lake lapped below, measuring the hull against rock. A red maple leaf came down with dignity, landed on the 7th riser, and considered the long work of becoming loam. Ansel took a breath. He is a man who trusts second looks. He took one. The lake belonged to a body of stories people in Bryson City tell clean over pie. When the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the valley to build the dam in the early 1940s, the town of Proctor had to move. Houses went down to foundations, barns left prints in the earth like giant hands, cemeteries were dug up with care and moved with ceremony, and some say not everything went where it should. On low years, people found stairs and walls, school steps, a chimney with a name carved into a cornerstone. On foolish years, people tried to steal the past, and the mud stole them instead. The county kept a list of places not to be brave. Ansel is not brave. He is patient. He walked back down to the skiff and dug out the coil of tape, a pencil, a stack of flagging ribbon. He thought of calling the park office and decided instead to take his measurements first and be useful with facts. He worked the way surveyors work, lengths and levels, muttering figures under his breath in a rhythm that kept the mind from dramatizing. He wrote Willow Gap on a page and underlined it softly with the pencil because the stone had asked. He measured tread depth, rise, total run to the bank, distance to the current water line, the angle of the bank above the last step. While he worked, a wind came from the east and pushed the surface into a skin. The steps looked less sure then. He set a small cloth bag at the foot of the first dry riser, full of pebbles and a coil of bright ribbon, because people in the mountains know that small offerings are not foolish if they help you think straight. Halfway through, He heard a bicycle bell, clear, bright, a single ring. He straightened. The sound did not belong to a road. It had the roundness of a thing sounded in an open room. He turned his head the way animals do when they want to aim an ear. The bell came again, faint, then a child's voice without words, the way children announce themselves to their own day. The air held it and gave it back. Then nothing. He called out a simple hello. The sound folded into the trees and did not return. He is not the kind of man who says names into a lake, so he went back to his numbers and let the bell be a sound that remembered and moved on. At sunset, he drove back to town. He did not mention the staircase at the diner because new stories grow better if you give them a night to decide their shape. He took his notes to the tiny desk in his rental and drew the thing. He wrote in the margin a line that was not part of any job he had ever been paid to do. The stair goes up past stone. The next morning, the lake wore a fog that fell in slow exhalations from the coves. He put the skiff in early, coffee in a thermos that had learned to keep secrets. The staircase waited. He climbed to the place where his boot had found air the day before. He lifted his foot and pressed again and met the same soft resistance, like cloth pulled tight across a doorway. The fog gathered and thinned. The lake stretched one slow muscle. He set his palm out where a banister would be if someone had considered such things. His fingers tingled with the small current that passes through the body at the exact moment a man tells himself he will try something and believes himself. He raised his knee and stepped onto what was not there. The foot held. He set the other. He stood an inch above the last stone and felt a dizzy smile crawl across his face as if he had been younger once and forgotten how to be. He took another. The air had weight where the step ought to be. He felt it through the rubber of his boot, a density that said, I am not stone and I am not stone. He climbed 3 steps in air and stopped because he is not brave. Breath is a kind of data. He took it in. The fog thinned. The stair under nothing led to a landing that the mind made, whether or not the world did. He imagined a door where the sky was, just to see if the imagination would draw a knob. It did not. He stepped back, down onto the good stone, and laughed once, quietly, pointedly, the way you tell yourself you are still a person whose days have jobs in them. On the 3rd day, he brought someone. Ansel is careful about who he invites into something he cannot name. He called Lucienne Pike, 61, who ran the little historical society in town with the energy of a river in March. She wore a quilted vest and a wool cap and the kind of boots women earn by living here. She brought pastries because facts get hungry and people are nicer when their hands are busy. She listened while he told it. She did not interrupt. She asked one question with her head tilted like a dog hearing a violin. Does it go up? It goes up, he said. They went out together. The skiff felt lightly ridiculous under the weight of their care. The morning did the few small things it always does before it remembers it is in charge. The staircase was there, gray in the light, patient as a broom left leaning against a wall you forgot to keep. Lucienne reached the second riser and stopped, and with an odd humility, put her palm to the wall so the stone might recognize her. She climbed to the place where air had learned a job. He watched her foot commit and hold. She gave him a look he will carry to his last morning. It had the quiet of a person who has been right about something important or wrong about something important and is making room for either result. She climbed one more and stopped. She did not push. She is not greedy. She came back down. Back in town, she made them tea in the society's office, which smelled of paper and lemon oil. She opened a ledger that had belonged to a church over the ridge that no longer stood. She turned pages until the binding sighed and laid flat, and then she tapped a finger next to a line written in a hand that had cared very much about straightness. Willow Gap Homestead, Brysonside. Stair and porch built by M. Garvey, 1931. Stepstones gifted by Applin sisters. She traced the names like a kind of blessing. People give names so the ground will keep them without bitterness, she said. Ansel told her about the bicycle bell, about the child voice that had no words. She nodded once, an economy that could hold an encyclopedia behind it. They found a photo in a folder of houses drowned to make the dam, a woman in a light summer dress halfway up a stair with a baby at her hip, and a boy of about 6 sitting on the landing with a tin pail, watching the photographer with straight seriousness. The steps were the same, the wall the same, the angle of the hillside the same, the lake not yet there to argue. Lucien tapped a pencil against the margin of the picture and said the thing that opened the room. My grandmother told me she saw the army men come to measure in 38. She said a man from Willow Gap told them he would build his stair to the sky if it meant the water would have to think twice. She said he whistled while he worked, and his boy rode a bicycle so fast it learned the curve of the road and kept taking it when the road turned into a path and the path turned into a trail and the trail turned into someone's memory of a trail. She smiled with one side of her face. I think you found where the whistling goes. That night, Ansel dreamed slow water and a boy's bell moving away just fast enough to be allowed. He woke before dawn with rain, finally practicing its lines on the roof. He left the boat on the trailer and took the road along the river to the dam because seeing the thing that made the change is sometimes a cure. The dam looked itself, muscle and worry. Men in hard hats wave the way men wave when their hands are busy with ladders and they still have manners. The sky had put its gray coat back on. The rain lasted 2 full days. The third day broke open into a light that could make a shuttered room reconsider. He took the skiff out at noon. The lake had risen a hand's width and drawn a green lip on the lower steps. He climbed again. The air steps remained, not drowned by a little more water, not meek. He stood on the third invisible tread and spoke toward the place where a door might be. Not loudly, not foolishly. Hello, he said. Then, because the air had made him braver than he ought to be, he added, I can bring your names back to where people can see them. The lake answered the way lakes answer, by being present with everything around them without offering comment. He sat on the 4th stone step and ate the pastry Lucienne had tucked into his pocket as if she had known he would forget to eat. He tried the air with his palm again and felt, for just a fraction of heart rhythm, a shape moved across it that was not his hand at all. The story traveled the way stories travel when they are useful. Not online, not yet. In town, over paper cups, in line at the post office, at the walk-in barber with the fish calendar 3 years behind. People gave him their versions. A woman who remembered a man who remembered seeing a parade of porches floating like rafts past the bend when the first flood came. An old man with a face like a woodcut who said he used to fish off a stone stair when his father was alive, and that if you whistled the tune that man used, you could make the bobber nod. A teacher who had kept a box of rail spikes and marbles found on low years and said she would clean them and bring them by the society office so Lucien could have them or pretend not to want them like she always did. In late October, with 2 hard frosts behind them, the county asked Ansel to guide a ranger and a structural engineer to the site. They went out in a John boat that carried its own echo. The ranger was a woman named Haynes who wore the park's green like a promise and carried the weight of a radio the way people carry their father's ideas. The engineer was a man with a gentle way of touching old things before speaking ill of them. They stood on the 5th stone step and looked up the ladder of air and did not mock it. The ranger wrote in a book. The engineer crouched and set a level on the 2nd tread and laughed once softly when the bubble centered itself as if the past knew about precision. Haynes asked the question, stories have to survive. Is it dangerous? Ansel shrugged in a way that held 3 chapters. It is dangerous the way memory is dangerous, he said. It makes people want to keep climbing. It is dangerous the way stairs are when you forget you have a body with limits. It is not dangerous the way an alligator is, or a bar fight. They set 3 stakes in the bank and tied flagging ribbon between, a line that told people who had to approach that someone else had been wise before them. Haynes asked for a sign, the simple kind that reads caution and does not attempt poetry. Ansel offered to come and keep an eye some afternoons when he had work nearby. She wrote his cell number in her book and tucked the pencil behind her ear in a way his mother would have liked. In early November, a fog rolled in low and forgot to leave. The lake became a page erased and written over, erased again. School buses turned their lights on at noon. The mountain that wears the dam as a decoration hid its fine line. Ansel kept away because the fog makes men do things they forgive themselves for later, and a man ought to reduce his opportunities for forgiveness if he can. On the first clear morning after, he went out early and found two objects on the fourth stone step that could not have gotten there by falling. A bicycle bell, rusted but round, the striker frozen in a kind of kindness, and a tin pail, the exact wrong size for anything useful, dented where a boy might have clapped it to make the sound bigger. He touched neither. He sat down. He greeted them with his breath in line, the way you greet animals that have decided to be near you. At 10, Lucien arrived with a thermos and two paper cups and the sort of force field that keeps good men from doing dumb things for no reason. She looked at the bell and the pail and did not pretend not to see them. She took photos that did not flatter the light and said the names in the ledger once: Lowe, Garvey, Applin, Willow Gap. She did not say a boy, she did not say a child. She put her hand on the sidewall and looked up the line of air with the plain candor of someone who has shored up more shelves than emotions and understands both. You can coax a story, she said, but not yank it. Take the bell to town. Leave the pail here for another day. We will see what the lake thinks of compromise. He took the bell gently, wrapped it in a handkerchief he had never found much use for before, and pocketed it like a chosen stone. Back at the office, Lucien set it next to a photograph and a typed card. Bicycle bell recovered from Willow Gap Stair, fall of 22, likely pre-flood artifact. On the card, a second line in pencil for people who read too fast. The stair goes up. In the second week of December, with the mountains blue as a bruise and the wind deciding to be cruel to make up for lost time, Ansel went out one last day before the holidays. He brought a crowbar because he had promised himself he would not bring a crowbar until the story invited one. He did not need it. The pail had sat, then vanished, then returned, then sat again with a rock in it a little smaller than a fist. He took the rock out and saw in the bottom of the pail, scratched by some patient hand or the work of a nail held at an angle, 3 words: "Open in summer." He laughed out loud then. So loudly, a pair of ducks took off in a panic and told other ducks about him for an hour. He looked up at the sky, which had forgotten him to tend to larger business. He put the pail back on the step. He told it, with what dignity he could muster, that he would. Winter happened the way winter happens down there. One day, the lake wore a shell of rime like a dare. The next day, it rained hard as coins. Ansel worked a road job in the next county and came home tired to soup and a radio with the news that would not stop wishing it were better. He sent Lucien postcards from 2 counties over with sketches of culverts no one needed, and she mailed him back photocopies of ledger pages with red pencil underlines that made more sense than his own arrows. By late June, the water had climbed enough to lick at the third riser and cover the first. The air above the invisible steps still felt like fabric pulled tight by a careful hand. School let out, and visitors came with coolers and the need to float and forget. Haynes put the sign back up twice. Ansel sat on the 8th stone step more than once and told people kindly that there was nothing up there for them unless they had time to spare and patience to listen. A few listened, most did not. No one fell, which felt like a policy. On a hot Monday, when thunderheads built tall and polite to the south and forgot to arrive, he took the pail and set it in his lap and used the crowbar not as a pry, but as a weight. He eased the thin tin sides apart where they had been pinched back over the lip like a secret. Inside, he found folded oilcloth, soft as a worn glove. Inside that, a photograph no larger than his palm, and a strip of paper with a line that looked like a prayer until he read it, and it felt like a list. The photograph showed the stair as it had been before the lake, the woman in summer dress and the baby at her hip, and the boy with the pail, sitting with a seriousness that has no word in English. The man who must be M. Garvey stood 2 steps down, hat in hand, as if introducing the stairs to whoever had the camera. Behind them, the ridge wore its trees in a confidence the mountains teach. On the back, in careful letters, someone had written, "So you remember how we looked when the water was a rumor." The strip of paper held one long sentence. When they came with clipboards, he whistled the tune about willow leaves and said he'd build the stair to the sky because steps are a kind of truth and the water would have to climb over the truth if it wanted to drown the house. There were names then, 3, the kind that drop out of families and get picked up by strangers who treat them right. He folded the strip back into the oilcloth and put all of it into the pail and set it on the step, because the story belonged to the stair more than it belonged to him. In August, a lightning storm chewed on the dam and left it as it had found it. In September, a girl with a blue braid and a polka dot dress climbed the real stone steps and stood at the place where air did its work and played a penny whistle softly, 3 notes, and then a run. Her grandmother sat on the second step and wiped her cheeks with a tissue she pretended was for sweat. Lucienne watched from the bank with a composure she had purchased fairly over years of deciding when to speak and when to file. Haynes wrote a note in her book that read in an unsentimental hand, "Leave space here." The last time Ansel went before the rains came back for real, he climbed onto the third invisible tread and set his palm out at the height of a child's head. He did not feel breath. He felt pressure. A small, exact pressure like the world confirming a measurement you would have sworn was off by just enough to drive you mad. He closed his eyes and saw the boy on the landing with the pail and the bell. He saw a woman take the last 2 steps at a practical pace, baby on hip. He saw a man look out at a hillside that had just become a lake and refuse to let the stair be anything but stairs. He opened his eyes, and the lake went on being a lake. There is not a larger lesson he can give you from this, except the one he wrote in the margin of his notebook after the second week, a sentence he did not quite understand then and understands in the small of his back now. Not everything drowned. Some things learn to keep their shape in the air and wait for your foot. If you go to Fontana when the water is down and the wind minds its manners, you can find the stair if you ask the right person and you promise not to hurry. It will be there the way durable things are there, honest about their age, unwilling to entertain your stunts. You can put your boot on the third step and feel something that does not owe you an explanation hold you anyway. You can look up at the sky and decide there is a door or decide there isn't, and the stair will permit either decision. You can listen for a bicycle bell and you may hear a loon instead, and that will be enough. If you tell the story afterward, tell it the way lakes prefer, with pauses, with dates spoken out loud so the years remember they are not just numbers, with names because names weigh the right things down. Say Willow Gap, say Garvey, say Applin, say a boy, though the paper does not give him to you. Say a woman moving with a baby on her hip and a list in her head and a refusal to shame the stairs with panic. Say a man who whistled a leaf tune and believed in steps the way people believe in scripture, not as decoration, but as an instruction on how to move the body when the body wants to quit. And if you find yourself on a day when the wind drops and the water stills, and you are offered the choice to test a step that does not belong to stone, ask your breath first. Make it even. Set your palm where a rail would be. Put your weight down like a promise. If it holds, climb one and stop. The air prefers people who do not need to conquer it to feel tall. Leave something small on the 5th step. A ribbon, a marble, a bell that waited in a drawer too long. Walk back down and let the day close the drawer. The stair will keep going up whether you are there to witness the miracle of plain persistence or not. That is how some things survive the flood. They decide to be their own house. They decide to be the part of the house you cannot drown. The babysitter's last text. Who's upstairs? The text came at 9:58 on a wet Friday in early November, the screen lighting the dim kitchen of a craftsman house on Maple Ridge Avenue in the town of Larkspur, Pennsylvania. The babysitter had written only 3 words, spaced as if she had to force her thumbs to move. Who's upstairs? Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Her name was Ione Kestrel, a college sophomore who took evening jobs to pay for studio art supplies and a public transit pass to the city. She was a quiet soul with a quick wit, the kind of person who noticed the way rain made halos around streetlights and the way children's laughter changed when they grew tired. 2 kids slept under that roof that night, a 6-year-old boy named Briar and his 3-year-old sister named Lark. Their parents, Rowan and Maeve Harrow, had left at 7:15 for an anniversary dinner at a restaurant by the river. The year, if you need to understand the way phones hummed and doorbell cameras watched, was 2019. The house at 42 Maple Ridge was one of those old American stories, built in wood and memory, a deep porch with a swing that complained just enough to be charming, oak floors that spoke out loud when the humidity changed, crown molding thick as a picture frame. At the back, a narrow staircase rose from the mudroom to a short landing, and then up again into the second floor where the bedrooms sat in a row like well-behaved children. At the top of the main stairs, there was a crawl space door that had once led to a linen closet and now led to a barely insulated wedge of attic, hot in summer and sharp with cold in winter, the kind of door that makes a welcome thud when it closes and an unwelcome thud when it doesn't. Before the Harrows left, they did all the small, loving rituals. Maeve set out a plate of sliced apples, a bowl of popcorn, and a note that read, "Help yourself to anything except the scotch." Rowan pointed to the thermostat and said the heat pumps kick on if the temperature dips. Fancy house, but the bones are stubborn. He smiled at Ione in the doorway, hair damp from the drizzle, denim jacket dotted with rain. Text us if the storm knocks the power out. Text us if the kids wake and ask for the song about the lighthouse. Text us even if you think it'll make us look overprotective. It won't. At 7:30, the children were bathed, pajamaed, and nestled into beds that smelled faintly of line-dried sheets. Ione read the lighthouse song twice, and the little girl fell asleep with a hand on the brother's shoulder, a tether strong enough to hold a moon in place. At 8, the dishwasher hummed its modest lullaby. At 8:20, the rain came harder, dropping like a handful of pebbles thrown by a polite intruder. At 8:42, the doorbell camera pinged, announcing a raccoon with ambitions. Ione's phone ticked with messages from a group chat, small bursts of jokes and memes. She answered two and then set the phone face down, because she had promised herself she would be the kind of sitter who watched and listened. She put a kettle on. She chose a mug with a hairline crack because hairline cracks reminded her of river maps. She stood at the back window and watched the alley, where a single streetlight blew a cone of yellow onto the wet blacktop like a candle someone had forgotten to snuff. At 9:21, a floorboard spoke upstairs. It was not the sound of a child rolling over and not the polite pop of wood releasing humidity. It was a stepped-on sound, slow and weight-bearing, forward and then a tiny, deliberate back. Ione took one breath, then another. The kettle clicked off. The house returned to its normal choir. She checked the baby monitor screen. Two small forms slept. The greenish night vision painting dreams onto their faces. She told herself she knew old houses. She told herself wind can make timber say things it doesn't mean. At 9:36, the sound came again, above the kitchen this time, in the hallway between the children's rooms. One step and another. A long pause. Then the faintest scrape, as if someone had scuffed a shoe and then, embarrassed by the sound, tried to rub it out with the sole. The kind of scrape that turns the air thin. Ione lifted the house phone from its cradle because old houses carry old phones like relics. No dial tone because this was 2019 and the landline was a costume. She put it back and picked up her cell. No missed call, no alert from the doorbell camera. She opened the parent's contact, hovered, did not press. First, she would look, she would be careful. She would not give Rowan and Maeve a reason to race home on wet roads unless there was a reason. She climbed the back stairs because they felt less like a stage. Each step was shallow and careful. The rain softened to a hiss. Her breath became a guest she had to host with manners. At the landing, the air grew cooler. She could see down the short hall into the little boy's room, the lighthouse nightlight casting a steerable arc of white. She could see the girl's room door nearly closed, just enough to make a crescent, the way some children like it. She could also see the crawlspace door at the top of the main stairs. It was closed, latch turned. That mattered more than it should have. She waited. Sometimes the house wants to know if you have patience. Sometimes it will reward you with silence. Sometimes it will not. There was a third sound, not a footfall this time, but a breath. Not hers. Not a child's soft, open-mouth exhale, but the kind of breath that pauses at the end like it is tasting the air. It came from the darkness beyond the crawlspace door, except the door was shut. Ione felt the tiny hairs along her forearms confess themselves to fear. She stepped into the boy's room. He slept with his mouth open just a little, lower lip shiny. Good. She stepped to the girl's room. Little Lark had turned onto her stomach, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Good. When Ione moved back into the hall, her eyes caught something at the far end where the light thinned. A strand of damp hair lay across the floorboards, faint as a pencil mark, a single narrow ribbon that did not belong to either child. It glistened. She knelt without thinking and picked it up. Cold. Clean. Long enough to belong to someone grown. She stood up too quickly and steadied herself with a hand on the wall. Her palm pressed into a nail head that had been painted over and sanded down so smooth it felt like a coin. She thought the oddest thought then. If I press that nail in, will the crawlspace door open by itself? She smiled at herself because fear makes even introverts dramatic in their own skulls. She returned to the back stairs, slow and exact, and only when she reached the fourth step from the bottom did she glance at her phone. The time read 9:58. The text she sent herself, as if letting the words exist outside her head could make them smaller, was only 3 words. Who's upstairs? She meant to send it to Rowan. She meant to send it to Maeve. She meant the message as a half joke with a serious underlayer. But the thumb that had learned to move fast learned the wrong dance. It went to her friend in the group chat, and by the time she realized, the message had already become a tiny flare in half a dozen pockets around town. Her friend replied with, "What are you doing?" and also joking, right? And also put them on speaker. Ione did not reply. She set the phone on the counter face up this time. She took the largest knife from the drawer and then immediately put it back because knives are not courage and courage is not noise. She chose instead a heavy flashlight from the mudroom shelf, the kind that doubles as a hammer. She clicked it on. The beam carved a clean white tunnel along the baseboards. She moved to the bottom of the main staircase now, because if fear wants you to circle, wisdom wants you to cross. The newel post was worn as a handshake, family photographs climbed the wall. A wedding photograph near the bottom showed Rowan in a blue suit and Maeve in a dress with sleeves that looked like light. Higher up, a picture of Briar in a lion costume, nap-flattened mane, grinning with the sincerity only a 6-year-old can manage. Above that, near the top, a framed landscape. The glass reflected the flashlight beam like a lid. Halfway up, she paused. There was that breath again. Not a cough, not a snore. A breath like someone who had been holding still too long and had to remind their body to keep doing the automatic things. The sound came from beyond the last step, in the shadow to the left, where the crawlspace door Saturday. It was closed, latch turned. She aimed the beam at the brass. The metal showed a fog that had not been there a minute ago, condensation, from a mouth that had exhaled near it. She kept her own mouth shut because you cannot take breath back once it is out. The latch moved. It moved too gently to be gravity. It made the tiniest metal-on-metal sigh. Then it stilled, as if the person behind the door had realized they had announced themselves and decided to pretend nothing had happened at all. Ione's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was firm in the way a music teacher's voice is firm when she asks a child to stop tapping the desk with a pencil. I'm a babysitter. The police are on their way. If you are a neighbor who has made a mistake, this is your chance to leave without me seeing your face. If you are not a neighbor, this is your chance to decide to be one. Nothing moved, but the house did a small thing then. It clicked. A sound traveled through the baseboards from kitchen to parlor like a cricket chirp. The refrigerator compressor had kicked on. The world had not narrowed to only this door. She stepped higher. She brought the beam closer to the latch. She did not touch it. She watched a drop of moisture on the brass slide very slowly toward the handle and then stop, held by a force that did not want to be named. From the children's rooms, nothing. From outside, rain. From down the hall, a draft like someone had opened a mouth to speak and then decided not to. She took the phone, thumb shaking now not from drama, but from the body's strange understanding of scales. She typed 911 and the call went through on the first chime. The dispatcher answered with a first name and a county. Ione told that calm voice her name, the address, the fact of 2 sleeping children, the fact of a locked door with breath behind it that did not belong to the family. The voice said, "Officers are on the way." The voice said, "Stay on the line." The voice said, "Do not open the door." So she did not. She watched it the way you watch a stage when you know the performer is already in the wings. She told the dispatcher every small thing she saw. The latch is fogged, the brass is pitted near the screw head, the paint around the jamb is chipped the way it chips when someone tries to open a door with a butter knife. The dispatcher asked about the kids, and she told her about the lighthouse song because sometimes the answer to a safety question is a story that proves you are paying attention. It took 6 minutes for the first cruiser to roll into the alley, though those 6 minutes ran long like string you cannot find the end of. Two officers climbed the porch steps, rang the bell softly out of habit, then tried the knob and announced themselves. Ione walked down the main stairs, not taking her eyes from the crawlspace door, unlatched the front door, and stepped back quickly so the officers could enter. Their names were Officer Tamsin Dupre and Officer Hal Moran. They were young enough to still wear the job like a coat borrowed from a bigger relative, and old enough to know when to keep their weapons holstered because children were sleeping. Ione pointed. The hall was framed now by their bodies and the yellow hallway light and the cleaner light of the flashlight. Officer Dupre nodded, raised a hand to let silence accumulate, and then approached the door with a slowness that reminded Ione of a conductor raising a baton before the first downbeat. Dupre put 2 fingers lightly on the latch and did not move it. She bent, eye to the thin seam between door and jamb. She inhaled. She did not exhale for a count of 3. Then she did, a controlled tide. She mouthed one word to Moran. There. Moran moved with that cop-slow speed that reads as kindness until it becomes a tackle. He positioned himself on the knob side. Dupre took the hinge side. They counted without sound. Moran turned the knob and pulled. The door did not open. Dupre drove her shoulder low into the panel, and the old wood decided to be new and gave with a crack that sounded like an ankle breaking far away. The space beyond was small, angled, cluttered, with things families save because they carry stories in them. A fan with no blade, a suitcase with travel stickers that meant Paris had existed once for someone in this house, 3 plastic bins of children's clothes marked in black marker, a broken chair that had not given up, and a person, folded into the angle between floor and pitch, knees under chin, face turned away from the light, hands empty and ready to lie about it. Dupre said, "Do not move." Moran said, "Show me your hands." The person did not show their hands. They lifted their left shoulder like someone about to stand in a narrow coffin, and then realized there was no way to both stand and not be seen. They kept their face turned. A smell came from the small hot space that was not attic smell. It was sweat and wool and rain and a cologne Ione could not name but would recognize for years in crowds and feel a short-lived lightening in her spine. The person finally shifted enough for the light to catch their cheekbone. Smooth, young, the jawline of someone who still believes they can sneak back to the version of themselves that did not make this choice. Dupree reached. The person flinched, then stilled. Moran took the wrists, quick. Plastic cuffs clicked, and Saturday. The person whispered one word so fast and so quiet, it sounded like a sound and not a word. Please. There are nights when a house rearranges what you know about it. There are nights when law and luck arrive at the same time and dress alike so you cannot tell who deserves the thank you. There are nights when children sleep through the loudest noises and wake to the softest ones. Breyer woke when Officer Dupre gently asked Ione if the boy had a favorite song she could sing while they stepped this stranger past his doorway and into a world that would be, for the stranger, smaller and heavier. Ione sang the lighthouse song, the boy rolled over, the girl sniffed twice and then reclaimed her rabbit. The name given at the kitchen table later, with the cuffs off and the hands folded around a paper cup of tap water, was Corin Vale. He was 22, a barback at a music venue downtown, a part-time mover for a storage company on the edge of town, a person whose landlord had changed the lock that very afternoon because rent was late again, and who had wandered past the Harrow's house just after 9, watching rain stencil shadows on the porch. He said the front porch light was off, that the back alley light was the kind that made him nervous because it buzzed. He said he had once done a job in this very house, moving boxes after Maeve's mother passed, that he knew the crawlspace door did not always latch if you pushed too hard. He said all this in a way that sounded like memorized lines. Officer Moran left for a minute and returned with a small bag-tagged chain of custody. Inside, a multi-tool with a narrow flathead blade that would fit under a painted jam and lever it without much damage, a pair of cheap cotton gloves, damp, a folded postcard someone had intended to mail, featuring a lighthouse on the coast of Maine and a note written in pencil that read, "We are well, love you, see you in December." The postcard had not been addressed yet. Corin looked at the lighthouse as if it had insulted him. "Why?" Officer Dupre asked. "Are you in a crawl space with a multi-tool?" Corin said he wanted to get out of the rain. He said he saw the back door wasn't fully latched. He said he knocked and no one answered. He said he stepped inside to be out of the weather. He said he heard children and then realized he had made a mistake and was trying to hide until he could unmake it. He said he had not gone near the bedrooms. He said he had not taken anything. He said most lies are just a breath away from the truth if you hold the breath long enough. The doorbell camera proved he had never rung. The back door, which Ione had locked after the raccoon, had not been forced, which meant the multi-tool had met the strike plate and learned a new way to talk. The thin condensation on the latch proved his face had been inches from the brass, as if he were listening through metal to weigh his chances. The damp hair on the hallway floor did not match Ione or the children. It matched Corin. The officers did not say poetry out loud, but sometimes evidence makes a poem whether or not you want it. Rowan and Maeve arrived at 10:28, windblown and wet, faces open with fear, and then with the specific relief parents make when they count the number of children and find the number unchanged. Maeve thanked Ione, then thanked Officer Dupre, then thanked the kettle for existing because it gave her hands something to do. Rowan walked to the base of the main stairs and looked up at the crawlspace door and put his hand on the newel post like a man greeting an old friend and apologized under his breath to the house for not knowing it needed him tonight. The rain slowed. The streetlight outside defined every leaf as if auditioning them for a brighter job. Corin Vale sat at the kitchen table and looked smaller and then larger and then smaller again, the way a person does when they realize they have chosen a story they cannot revise. He asked for a lawyer then, as was his right, and the night shifted into a new shape with paperwork and phone calls and the sound of zippers on evidence bags. Later, after the officers had gone and the house had been put back in order with all the rituals humans use to convince themselves the world is knowable, Rowan stood on the porch and stared at the street. A car hissed by, tires whispering on wet asphalt. Somewhere, a train declared itself. He turned when Ione stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and the brittle, beautiful calm people make after the danger has taken its hands off their shoulders. He said thank you a dozen ways that did not use the word thank. She said, of course, a dozen ways. That meant I am shaking on the inside, but I am still here. Maeve joined them, the porch light warming the edges of her hair, and the 3 of them stood in a small triangle like a warning sign no one else would read. When Maeve spoke, her voice had a new floor under it. We will change the locks. We will reinforce that door. We will move the postcard basket. We will install a sensor that turns on a light at the slightest motion. We will do the things that let us sleep. Ione nodded and did not say that sleep would come with its own sounds now. The sound of a breath behind a door. The sound of a latch fogging. The sound of a floorboard speaking the truth. There is a detail the police report will not mention because police reports must make simple lines out of crooked nights. At 9:59, after sending the text to the wrong chat and before calling emergency services, Ione leaned her forehead against the cool plaster of the stairwell for the space of 1 heartbeat. She whispered something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a promise. Okay, if someone is up there, I will not be the person who opens the door and invites them in. I will be the person who names the danger out loud. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Not bravery that charges, but the steadiness that refuses to be tricked into being polite to danger. The next morning, the November sky tried on a bland blue and liked it. The town of Larkspur went back to the work of a Saturday. Kids in hoodies kicked at leaf piles. The bakery line wrapped twice around the counter. A woman in a gray coat standing by the river thought the water sounded like someone ripping silk very slowly and wondered who she would tell that to. Ione slept past noon and woke to a peanut butter text from Maeve which read in that shaky grammar of gratitude, "Come by for dinner anytime. And also, I found your denim jacket on the porch swing. And also, there will be pie tonight if you want pie." She smiled and answered with too many thank yous and one yes to pie. She showered longer than she needed to, stood still in the water in a way that made time into a warm curtain, then dressed in gently clean clothes that smelled like detergent and a future. When she stepped outside, the air had that crisp, crisp edge. That means the first hard frost has already visited and left behind a postcard of itself on every windshield. Maple Ridge Avenue looked like an old movie taught to speak color. She walked past houses that had their curtains open a little wider than usual, past neighbors who held eye contact just a second longer, the way people do when the story has almost become a myth and they want to remind themselves it is still shaped like a person. On the Harrow's porch, there were new screws in the latch. The crawlspace door upstairs had a length of wood screwed diagonally across it like a stern eyebrow. A small motion sensor had been installed in the hall. It blinked a polite green and then went to sleep. The kids were in socks, sliding across the floor, laughing the laugh that children make the morning after a storm when the yard is new again. Rowan handed Ione a slice of apple pie on a paper plate and said again what he had said the night before, but with the daylight, making his voice warmer. "You kept your head, you called, you stayed steady." That is the whole job sometimes. We will tell people that part when we tell them the story. Not who he was, not what he said, not the smell. We will tell them you named the danger and didn't let it decide your speed. The town told the story in its own ways. The newspaper, which had been saved from extinction by a stubborn editor named Lita Quinn, wrote a piece with the careful headline, "Babysitter's Quick Thinking Leads to Arrest in Overnight Burglary Attempt." The group chat learned, gently from Ione herself, that sometimes jokes congeal into myths, and myths can be mean. At the music venue, a bartender wiped the length of the bar 3 times, then once more, then stopped. At the storage company, a supervisor stared at a stack of moving blankets and tried to add up what the numbers meant about people. There is not a moral here, sharp and so clean it can cut bread. There is not an ending where everyone claps and the house resumes being only a house. There remains a door with a new diagonal board and screws that will loosen over time and be tightened again. There remains a boy who will ask, on a night 2 weeks later when rain drums the gutter, "Can you sing the lighthouse song one more time?" And a girl who will say, not the part where the foghorn sounds, that part sounds like a giant in the crawlspace. There remains a young man named Corin, whose first court date will arrive with a sky the exact color of the alley light, and who will have to decide whether to say the word sorry to the ceiling or to the faces in the room. At 9:58 on some future night, a phone will light in some other kitchen in some other town, and a person will type 3 words spaced out as if their thumbs had to be convinced. Who's upstairs? If you are that person, hear this story as a map of breath. Name the danger, make the call, keep your voice exactly as loud as it needs to be and no louder. Stand where you can see doors and hallways. Carry light. Remember that a latch that fogs is a sentence the house is trying to say. Let the sentence finish. If you are listening from a city, may the traffic outside be ordinary and honest. If you are listening from a farmhouse that knows every creek by its first name, may the wind be the only guest tonight. If you are listening in a small apartment where the neighbor's footsteps already live in your ceiling, may you learn the grammar of each tread so well that the first strange syllable tells you exactly what to do. The babysitter's last text was a question pointed upstairs, but the real end of the story is how she answered all the other questions pointed at her. Will you panic? Will you try to be polite when the moment calls for clear? Will you open a door because silence asked sweetly? She chose no, no, and no. She chose the shape of a steady voice on a thin line. She chose to be the reason the house could go back to being only wood and memory. Some nights, when she passes the Harrows by chance and the porch swing is still, she hears only the rain and the river, and that is enough. Some nights, she hears the old door upstairs settle as the heat kicks on and thinks, with a small smile, that even a house can be taught to breathe more quietly. And on the better nights, every window along Maple Ridge holds a square of light cut perfect as a fresh slice of pie, and the street keeps its watch, and the children sleep so deep the world could rewrite its rules, and they would wake to the new rules fresh and ready to be memorized. If that happens where you are, tell me when. Tell me what the air smells like. Tell me the hour, spoken slowly so the world cannot run away with it. Tell me if the latch on your upstairs door is dry and dull or a little fogged from someone's breath. Tell me if you are holding a mug with a hairline crack that looks like a river map. Tell me if the house has taught you any of its words. And if your phone lights at 9:58 and the message reads as simple and terrible as a knock, remember the kitchen in Larkspur and the steady girl in the denim jacket, and say out loud to no one and to everyone, not tonight, not on my watch, not in this house. The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged